You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is sponsored by XDEEP and is also supported by the patrons of Speaking Sidemount, whose help makes everything you're about to listen to possible. If you love what we do and are willing to help us grow and improve the podcast, then please consider becoming a member of our production team by joining our patron community. It costs just a few dollars per month, but it makes a huge difference to the podcast. And there's a large and growing amount of content exclusively for patrons. There's bonus videos with behind-the-scenes segments, episode reviews, equipment deep dives, sidemount tips, setup discussions, and secret sauce on how you can become a top sidemount diver. There's also monthly live sessions where we get together to answer your questions and discuss all things sidemount. And soon there'll be premium patron-only episodes coming out every 2 weeks. You won't want to miss them. And so, on with the show. I interviewed Brian Kakuk way back in episode 8, which, believe it or not, was released in October of 2018. What I now refer to as the good old days of international travel and dive trips or expeditions. We can only hope that the world recovers quickly from COVID-19 and that our borders reopen and the aviation industry is able to somehow retool and return to its former glory. Now, Brian is one of the modern day pioneers of sidemount and sidemount rebreather diving. He's a renowned explorer, having been involved in numerous cutting edge exploration projects, especially in Florida and the Bahamas. For the past 20 years, Brian has resided on Abaco Island in the Bahamas, and through his exploration and conservation efforts has become the recognized guardian of the Crystal Caves of Abaco, considered some of, if not the very best, diveable caves in the world. Since we last spoke, Brian has been working on some outstanding projects, but has also been faced with tremendous challenges and hardship. In this episode, Brian shares the emotional story of his recovery following Hurricane Dorian and how he's now dealing with the current COVID-19 lockdown. We also get into Sidemount CCR, the Shearwater NERD 2, and Brian's involvement in Jonathan Bird's brilliant IMAX feature, Amazing Caves. All this and much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Hey Brian, great to have you back on Speaking Sidemount.
Really happy to be back. Thanks for bringing me in.
Yeah, so mate, you've had a year that I would suggest many people wouldn't come back from. Hurricane Dorian effectively wiped out many parts of the Bahamas, including your home on Abaco. And now we're all facing COVID-19. It has us all locked down at home playing with our dive gear, wishing we could get wet. So how are you doing?
It's stressful. I wish I was in the water right now. I was in the water a couple of days ago and wasn't expecting to have a complete shutdown. We're on 24-hour lockdown right now. Yeah, we have to do what we have to do. Anybody who has any common sense understands that this is absolutely necessary to try to slow this thing down. Although it sucks, we have to do what we have to do.
Yeah, and I think especially in parts of the world like you, I know for New Zealand here, we've kind of been very fortunate that we're so far away from the rest of the world. Look, here's our picture. A week and a half ago, we had 20 cases. Now we're 150, and that's with our borders closed to people outside of New Zealand citizens. And so it's coming to us from overseas at the moment. We've just had some local transmissions. We think we've got 2 of those. So as soon as that happened, we got shut down. And so as of tonight, we are shut down pretty much the same. But I think they're being really reasonable about it. We're allowed to go outside. We've just got to stay 2 meters away from each other. And the government's really putting it back on us. They're saying, hey, listen, you're shut down for 4 weeks, and if you want it to be 4 weeks, then follow the rules. And if you don't follow the rules, then we're going to shut you down for longer. What is awesome for us here, I just received a subsidy from the government to keep my employees employed. So I'm so grateful and happy that that's come through. And so what that means is while the effects on business, especially tourist businesses like us, are somewhat catastrophic, at least we can keep our employees going to some degree while we're locked down. Our costs are lower, but I'm so happy that that's happened. So anyhow, we're all dealing with it. I think it is the right thing. We've got to make sure that our healthcare systems can deal with it. And at the end of it, hopefully we come out and this virus goes away or is diminished to a point that it's negligible, and we have to see how that goes. I started out talking about Hurricane Dorian, and obviously COVID-19 is at top of mind, but it wasn't that long ago, just last, I think it was September, right, that this hit you guys, and I just can't even comprehend what it was like. So tell us what it was like when the hurricane was bearing down on you. What preparations were you able to make before the storm hit?
Well, I mean, here in the Bahamas, it's sort of an annual thing. We all know about hurricanes. We know how to prepare for them. I mean, for your normal large storm, like a Category 2 or Category 3, even up into a 4, we prepare. We know we're going to lose shingles. We know we might lose a couple of roofs and that kind of thing. And to be honest, before this, I had 5 direct hits. I've seen 5 eye walls in the last 30 years. So, we prepare, and it sucks. It's going to be a lot of work, but none of us expected what happened. Not anyone here. Like I said, all of us who have been here for very long periods of time have seen big storms. And we did our usual preparations. And we watched it head offshore, and it was very tentative as to whether it was actually going to come into our neighborhood or not. It made a couple of changes at the last second. Then when it decided to come straight for Abaco, it just really intensified. It just built up really, really strong. It's never happened here before. No storm has ever been that big in this country. We all thought it was going to hit us as a 3, and then within 24 hours, it was cranking. We all just hunkered down, and there was nothing we could do at that point. And there are just thousands of unbelievable stories on this island about people. A very common one is people saying we were in the bathroom that was the last place that had 4 walls. We were all in the bathroom pushing against the door, and all of a sudden it got light inside the bathroom, meaning the whole roof had just gone. When the wind finally died down, they opened the door and walk outside, and there's nothing but a foundation. That story happened over and over again. I have friends who swam out of their homes, out of the windows of their homes. I saw a video of a woman who had a baby in a basket who was swimming with the baby in the basket in this raging torrent. We had 20 feet of water in town.
Yeah.
Up to the eaves on the first floors of the roofs. So none of us could have expected anything like this. It's unprecedented. And I personally got very, very lucky. I live in a little valley. So although I got flooding, we took a couple of feet of water in the building, and I lost both ends of the roof. That is nothing compared to what a lot of the people went through here. I still have friends who are living in tents next to the foundations of their homes.
Yeah. As you're describing the aftermath, just looked catastrophic. How have you been able to recover and come out of that? I was with Ed Sorensen just a few weeks later, and he was personally flying supplies over, and there was a give a little page and all that sort of thing. I mean, it was awesome to see the support. How have you been able to come out of that from that catastrophic scene?
One thing I can tell you, if it wasn't... Sorry. God, where did that come from?
Well, it's an emotional thing, isn't it?
Well, what I do for a living and what I've been through and adventures and military and all this other stuff, the storm wasn't what was so bad. It was after the storm. I'll tell you right now, if it wasn't for the U.S. and the people in the U.S. helping us out, we'd all still be sleeping on the ground here, crawling over the rubble. All of these NGOs that came in, unbelievable. I saw U.S. Coast Guard helicopters landing in hurricane force winds to carry people out of here. The storm hadn't finished yet, and they were already here, landing where I had my van parked. I lived in my van for a while up on a hill because the house was flooded. But the Coast Guard was landing in these hurricane force winds, and I just couldn't believe that they could physically do that. In and out, hours upon hours. And then when the NGOs showed up, I had friends of mine who landed in my backyard with helicopters and took me to talk to the NGOs who were coming in. We have a place here in our compound where we can house a lot of people, and it survived for the most part. It needed some work, obviously, and so people like Samaritan's Purse and most of all, Team Rubicon. Oh my God. Those guys, they're like the Marine Corps of the NGOs. They came in here, they were sleeping on the ground in tents, not showering for days on end, eating MREs, and waking up every day saying, what can I do for you?
It's outstanding, isn't it?
Amazing. Without those guys, there's no way we could have done what we've done. Me personally, I had the entire international diving community, is what it seemed like. It's pretty crazy. Just came up, stepped up. Ed Sorensen, amazing, put together a GoFundMe site, and then amazing donors to our foundation, Bahamas Caves Research Foundation. They allowed us to come back. It was all because of them. I was very fortunate. I got money in the bank right away, and the second we were able to physically get materials here, I started hiring guys, hiring anybody I could to come in and do carpentry work, help me muck out the house. I had to replace an entire room that got kind of collapsed because all the water came into it, and get electricity started here. We've been on a 30K generator for a bunch of months. I'm just now back on city power, which I'm one of the few that are back on. And so only because of the kindness of all these other people, we're able to be back where we are.
It is an amazing thing, isn't it? With so much crap going on in the world, so much negativity and so many things going wrong, and yet to see people come together when things have gone wrong to support people who they consider their own, which is where you stand there. It is pretty staggering, isn't it?
Absolutely. And like I said, there's so many people who haven't had the opportunities that I've had for help, and they're still living in tents, and they don't have running water. And now they have to stay within their little yard, which consists of a tent and maybe some show yard space. It's crazy.
And this is really just another kick in the teeth, isn't it, with COVID-19, just when it was looking like you were back up and running.
Yeah, so we are back up and running. I mean, physically, Bahamas Underground we went without work for about 4 months and just worked hard to get the place going again, finding accommodations for clients, things like that, networking with people and getting the airports open back up. And then all of a sudden we were back at it. And I was completely booked until mid-July. So to go 4 months without any work and then all of a sudden 2 months of really good work, everybody was really happy to be back here. And we had amazing dives with a lot of great clients, and then everything shut down again. So it's kind of a double slap. This too shall pass.
Well, that's exactly right. We're doing what we have to do now, and to not do this is incomprehensible. So we have to do it. I loved your attitude to it. I mean, you were starting to make some posts on self-isolation and your cave diving and doing solo exploration and working on new equipment setups with your dual KISS sidekicks. And that's gone now. But look, let's circle back and do a recap of the Caves of Abaco, because you and I caught up, I think it was in episode 8, and this is going to be episode 49. So, that's just staggering to me. But remind us of the treasure that you have on your doorstep.
Yeah, well, we're so fortunate that these caves here are some of the most amazing caves in the world. And obviously I'm biased. I mean, it's the reason I moved here was because of these absolutely amazing caves. We kind of collectively call them the Crystal Caves of Abaco. But Dan's caves, Ralph's caves, Nancy's cave, these are all inland caves that are within a now protected area, almost 34,000 acres that the government has decided to put them aside and protect them because of our work and because of our promoting them on National Geographic and BBC and all of these, done 25 different documentaries. But these caves are just so stunning, the crystal formations, the representations of different glacial periods because of the buildup and breaking down of the cave systems and showing different ice ages, different glacial periods, I should say, and just incredibly lengthy caves. I mean, we're coming up on 12 miles in Dan's cave. It's definitely the longest cave in this country and possibly the longest island cave in the world. I think there's one in Cozumel that might be a competitor, but other than that, I don't think there's many other that can even compete.
Yeah, it's really staggering. And I did a couple of episodes on Somos Los Cenotes, the efforts they're trying to make in Muyul in Mexico to protect the caves from development. But the work that you've done there in terms of conservation really is important in that respect, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been fortunate again to partner with an amazing group called Friends of the Environment. We're literally all in the same compound. And so they basically taught me how to write a proposal, sort of guided me through the process and showed me what needed to be shown, what needed to be written. We did a lot of education outreach as well as like town meetings. Local stakeholders could give their input about, hey, this is a bad idea because of this, or we think it's a good idea and we'll get on board. And then when we explained that we weren't trying to set it aside in the case of where nobody could use the land, basically we wanted it to stay exactly the way it is and to still have all historical cultural uses of the land, hunting, fishing, us cave diving. I mean, everybody who's ever used the property in the ways that they have in the past would continue to be able to do so. We just didn't want any development. And they're like, heck yeah, man, sign us up. So we got hundreds and hundreds of letters of support from prominent local Bahamians. Basically, if they want something done, it's going to happen. So right. And eventually that went to the government and they said, okay, well, it sounds like all the Abconians want it, so we're going to give it to them. And so now
it's fantastic.
It's amazing. It was an amazing process, a good learning process for me. And we just, like I said, we had amazing partnerships with Bahamas National Trust and Antiquities Monuments and Museums Corporation, and then Friends of the Environment, and then our foundation as well.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I think one of the challenges in Mexico is when you've got a landowner there who has an opportunity to potentially sell the land and make a heap of money versus continue to use it in the way they've historically done. It's a real challenge for them because they can set their family up for life by selling the land, and being able to preserve it for their own use as they have historically is just awesome. And obviously it shows where they place their values, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we were very fortunate in that it was not privately owned. It was owned by the Bahamian government. It was held under the Forestry Act. And the Forestry Department are the folks who decided that we want to preserve this, we want to set this aside. And so now it's done. And one little update, probably since the last time we spoke, is that the British government had started going around to all of their commonwealths, Canada, a bunch of countries here in the Caribbean, Bahamas, and said, listen, we are setting aside prime forests in all of our commonwealths in the name of the Queen. It's going to be called the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy. And basically, we want you, if you would, to take a section of forest that represents your country, your best prime forest, and say, this is going to be set aside in the name of the Queen. And so the Prime Minister here said, absolutely, we have this Blue Holes protected area down at Abaco, and we'll just add this as another layer of protection to that. So now it's actually protected twice, which is absolutely amazing.
Absolutely love it. One of the things we're working on here at New Zealand at the moment is establishing more marine reserves. So important to have these areas set aside where they can be left to, number one, be as they should be. But for us, it's really the pressure of fishing is really the big issue. Pollution as well, but we don't have so much of that as we do overfishing at the moment. And so being able to have areas that are set aside to be natural and pristine is so important. Well, you were telling us that these caves are still going. What are you exploring right now?
Well, the trend of this particular cave system, Dan's and Ralph's Caves, well, it's all Dan's cave now. We actually connected it. Steve Bogarts did the physical connection. Working on this for about 10 years. And we finally got dialed in using Ken Smith's pingers. So Steve and I worked together very closely, and we got really, really close. And then one day, Steve was able to get through this just ridiculously stupid mud-filled, clay-filled restriction. I'll let you talk to him about that one day. And he found my line on the other side. For months and months, we didn't know whether it was actually connected because we tried to find it from the other side. And for weeks while he was here, we couldn't verify it. It was only until I got on the Sidemount CCRs and I was able to spend hours and hours in the back hunting down lines. I finally found it. I said, wait a second, this looks a lot like what he was describing. And sure enough, I found it. I videotaped it. I saw exactly where he had his little episode. You could look at it and see it all unfolding. It was pretty crazy. But anyway, so yeah, it's officially connected. So yeah, it's an amazing, amazing thing. So these caves have a tendency to run north, northwest, south, southeast. And so on both ends from the entrance, we're out almost 10,000 feet, both directions. And both ends are wide open, right? The reason I'm so hot and heavy about dual Sidemount rebreathers is I just physically can't get enough stages cached into the cave on setup dives without hurting the cave because it's so ridiculously fragile. Go on YouTube and look at some of my exploration videos. They're sort of like the first-person helmet-mounted GoPro. It's just really decorated. You spend so much time lying on your side with a stage out in front of you, hovering in between fragile bars of crystal as you're trying to squeeze through there without damaging anything to get to the next little place where you can finally just lay flat and say, okay, I'm going to rest here for a second.
I know that feeling.
Physically, you're just like, oh my God, I'm glad that's over with. And then it's even more in front of you.
Hey, this is a different level, but that brings me back to my training with Ed, and I was a very newbie Sidewinder diver, and I'm doing a dive with him and a hole in the wall, and Ed's following me, and I'm desperately trying to go through this mega silty, quite small sections, not restrictions, but small sections, and not throw silt in Ed's face. So the pressure was immense, and I loved it, though. It was so much fun, but I know that feeling of getting to the end of something and going, oh, shit, I can relax for a second.
Exactly. Yeah, so there's that end, which is the northwest section. There's so much cave out there. Where my line ends right now, cave is going both deep and shallow. These caves are multi-tiered, so there are thousands of feet at a depth of about 150 feet. There's thousands of feet at 110 feet, and then there's thousands of feet at 75. And it's all over the top and underneath of each other. It's like the most amazing crystal jigsaw puzzle you've ever seen in your life. It's just fantastic. So out there at the end of the west section, it's going in all directions. There's so much cave out there. I will never be able to finish this as just one diver. It's going to be the next generation is going to have to pick it up. And then the southeast part, there are some pretty serious grinder restrictions out there, but they're not so small that we can't push a scooter through them and then pick up on the other side because the rest of the cave is pretty big. It's all deep. It's in that 100 to 150 foot range. So the deco obligation of these dives is pretty big, but it's wide open at the end of that as well.
Yeah, and obviously, given that there's so much to do, you must have some favorite parts and some parts that you're saying, this is the part that Brian Kakuk's going to do.
Yeah, I tell some of my clients this, obviously they want to go see, we want to see the most spectacular stuff. And I do obviously show spectacular stuff, otherwise I wouldn't have a business. But there are many places that I get into, and I call them we're not worthy rooms. They in there, and it's just like, no, we just don't belong here. This is not for us. Eventually somebody after I'm long gone will probably go in there, and hopefully they'll have the same attitude that it's just, we're just too clumsy, too big, too oafish to even be back in these places, no matter how good we are. And so I feel like, there's plenty of other cave out there. There's plenty of other spectacular cave out there. Let's leave this alone. There's at least a half a dozen, if not a dozen places that I really felt like that and just backed out and said, okay, we don't need to be in here.
I love that. And so one of the things that crossed my mind when I was watching you the other day is your solo diving, right? So let me ask you about that for a minute, because obviously many of our listeners are relatively new to diving, new to tech diving. And of course, we're all taught that we should be diving with a buddy. When do you think that it's appropriate to solo dive, and under what circumstances is it okay?
For me, mostly it's just so nobody can laugh when I screw up. There's nobody there to see.
I like it.
But for the most part, it's all about the environment. If you're in big cave, you're on scooters, and why not have buddies? Why not enjoy the experience? I'm a little bit of a shut-in. My whole life is this. So my time in the cave is Brian time. That's my time, and I'm very selfish with it, I would say. To be an explorer here in 2020 and to swim into a place by yourself that is just so stunning that the most dangerous part of the whole dive is that your jaw drops and you drop the rag. It's just ridiculously beautiful. And to be able to say, I was the first human to see this, and I have it all to myself just for this moment. I don't have to tell anybody about it, or I don't have to. It's mine just for that moment. And for me, that's what really drives my exploration, is that whole feeling of, holy cow, it happened again. I've been here 15 years. And every few months, I get another one of these things. And you're just like, no way. There is no way. It's almost like somebody's plotting it in front of you, putting it in front of you just as you arrive there. Here you go. Find this. It's crazy. But from the solo standpoint, there's that aspect of it. The other part is, for me, when I first started cave diving, I started solo because I had dive partners who didn't take it as seriously as I did. Oh, you wake up on Saturday morning, you go knock on the door. Come on, let's go. Oh, dude, I drank so much last night. There's just no way. I had friends get banned because of it, that type of thing. And they just didn't take it as seriously as I did. Obviously, I'm over the top about it. But I just feel like this is what I'm driven to do. And another person is not going to stop me from doing it. And so I developed more of a not just solo, but independent attitude.
Yes.
The solo is one thing, and the independent part is the other thing, where you look at the acceptable level of risk, you plan for it, you train for it, and you carry the equipment for it. So I've been very successful in my explorations that most of my big dives that I feel like I've accomplished, with the exception of a couple. I'm also the co-holder of the women's depth and distance record with Jill Heinerth. But for the most part, all of my big dives, I was in there on my own. It was such an amazing feeling. The safety side of it is obviously if you're doing extreme side mount or no mount stuff, there's no room for a second diver. First of all, they're not going to see anything. Second of all, if something goes south, then you have people in your way to get out. There's also the more equipment that you put into the water, the greater the chances are of one of those pieces of equipment failing.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a few people about this. I spoke to some of the CDG guys, Michael Thomas and so on, and while they are very strong proponents of team diving, the independent word comes in a lot. You're team diving, but you're effectively on your own, especially in restrictions. And so therefore you have to be able to deal with any problem, any issue. And I think you're right. I mean, having multiple people in there, obviously at the same time, if an issue happens, it only means that potentially people are in your way when you need space. I do a lot of solo diving myself as well. And most of the time for me, I'm at a completely different level to you for sure. But many times what I'm doing is I'm diving, especially for me, it's the Canterbury wreck. I dive a lot on my own. And I know that wreck like the back of my hand. I served on that ship for 6 years. It was my home. A little bit like your caves, I guess. You can blindfold me anywhere in that wreck, and I believe I could find my way out. And the truth of it is, I don't have a lot of buddies that can go where I want to go. I'm down on the bottom of the boiler room and places that I just can't take many other people, or I haven't got a buddy who wants to go. If I do, then I'm more than happy to share it. But at the same time, I love the experience of being there on my own. And the same thing, it's making sure I've got the equipment, the skills, the experience, the mindset to deal with something if it does go wrong. But I do enjoy Steve time, a little bit like you said, Brian time, of being able to go places and try and set things up and set up video and just have a play in my little playground there.
Yeah. It's so strange because, as an instructor, as you let your students go out into the world and do their stuff with their newfound skills, the first thing you think about is, please don't go solo diving yet. Get some experience under you. And that's so do as I say, not as I do. Because there were no other dive buddies around, and because of those issues that I had noted already, I decided, even right out of the gate, I was solo diving. I was doing deep exploration, side mount, down to 100 meters on air, crazy, stupid. And so you just hope that they won't do that kind of stuff, because a lot of our friends aren't here anymore who did it when we were doing it, and just totally got lucky. I mean, it was luck. We used the right equipment and everything, but I definitely should not have been in a lot of the places that I was as a young newbie explorer. But when I first learned how to cave dive, I was in a place where most of the cave was virgin. So even as somebody who was brand new to the activity, all of a sudden there was all this virgin cave just thrown at me. And man, that's an incredible feeling for somebody who just got into it.
Yeah, amazing. All right, now I see you're doing some work diving dual redundant rebreathers with the KISS sidekicks, and you talked about that a couple of minutes ago, which was awesome. Can you share a bit on what you're doing there and what this configuration is doing with you over open circuit bailout? You mentioned staging, but there must be some other advantages as well.
Sure. So I personally have worked with dual rebreathers even back in Wakala back in 98. We had the dual Cislunar Mark 5P. And so essentially it's about extended range. This is not a recreational configuration by any means. First of all, it's a lot of setup. It's a lot of preparation. It's a lot of breakdown. And there's a lot of task loading involved as well. I mean, it's hard enough for a lot of people, especially new CCR divers, to maintain one loop, let alone having two loops and explore and all the other tasks that come with exploration. So we've been doing it for a long time. And there are others that I hear in North Florida who are also working with different rigs doing the same thing. My chosen rig is the KISS Sidekick. I know the Sidewinder is all the rage right now, and it's an amazing kit, but I seriously doubt that there's too many people who have the hours on the Sidekick that I do right now. I decided, because I've always known that I was going to go to this level with it as far as dual side-mounted CCRs and hopefully eventually get rid of the OC bailout. So the whole evolution of the rigs that I use has been working toward this point. Mike Young at KISS has been unbelievable in helping me with this. I've taken a Cislunar Mark 5P canister and and adapted the head of the Sidekick so that we have a hydrophobic membrane and a non-floodable, a non-caustic side mount rebreather. There's not too many of those around. So this is all is an evolution towards this totally independent side-mounted CCR configuration. Now, one of the things I want to really make sure people understand is that this is not diving as one rebreather and the other one is bailout, especially for the type of diving that I do. That won't work. Not knowing that the other loop is absolutely ready for you to go on at all times is not something that we can have in our type of diving. So my mindset towards using this configuration is that they will be dived just like open circuit. There will be gas switches. There will be back and forth between the two rigs every few minutes and with every depth change in order to make sure that the PO2s stay relatively close. If you do have an emergency while you're breathing one side, that you can immediately know that you can go onto that other side because just a few seconds ago it had a comparable PO2. And also make sure that, you know, when you're using computers on both sides on each individual one, I prefer the nerds, that those will also have comparable decompression obligations based on CO2s being similar throughout the dive. So the Sidekicks are working out pretty well. I don't have that many dives on it yet. I did dive it briefly in Nevada when we were doing the Ancient Caves show. We were diving dual CCRs in there. Mike had made this amazing, basically the water in there is 93 degrees. So we were worried about the breathing gas being too hot. I think he calculated at over 110 degrees or something like that. So that was our exhaled temperature.
That's caused by body temp, but also the temperature of the reaction and the absorbent?
Correct. And your body as well.
Yeah.
So we thought that for prolonged periods of time, that would be too hot. And so Mike came up with this ingenious plan. This guy's incredible. Came up with creating a chilling unit that is in line of your breathing system. Now, no one's ever had to cool gas before that I'm aware of. We were cooling breathing gas on a Sidekick CCR in the bottom of a cave in the Death Valley in Nevada. Because of the setup, it was much heavier than the stock unit, which was on the other side, because we didn't have enough of the chilling units to go around. And it really threw me off kilter, and we're supposed to be making an IMAX movie. Try it without it. We were able to survive. No one ever got into a bad scenario or anything. So we went without the chilling unit. But in the future, that's something that he's got in his quiver, so to speak. And we will be looking in the future. It can also be used to actually heat the breathing gas as well. And he's had good luck with that on the canisters of the sidewinders. My point is, Mike Young has just been an incredible innovator. He's like, what do you need? What's wrong? What do you need to go further? What's bugging you? You know, and we talk about it. And he's like, okay, here, try this. And he just sends it to me. I'm one of the official crash test dummies for because we got the T-shirt and all that. But it's been a great relationship because he's building units for extended range. He's building units to suit the environment of what the explorers need. Not just my environment, but lots of different environments.
Yeah, no, I hear you. As a new Sidewinder diver, I think one of the things I love as a newbie is this unit is so simple. It's basically a couple of canisters, a loop, a counter lung, and has a head, and I've got 3 O2 sensors in there, and it connects to a nerd, but that's it. The end. So there's nothing else for me to worry about. I can understand how that works pretty easily, and now all I've got to learn is how to drive it. It's such a pleasure to know that you're pretty much diving a unit that's almost bulletproof, and sure, you have to manage the things you have to manage. I'm loving it.
Going back to the side-mounted CCR, I'm a big proponent for KISS. I think it's amazing units that we have. There's so many units coming on the market right now. I've seen Golem Flex. There's a new iteration. They've done some mods and stuff. That's looking really good as well. The Dive Soft, there are people who are loving the Dive Soft rigs. I think
I think the Liberty has Steve and Jill Heinerth, Becky Kagan Shots also diving that. So that's getting a lot of really good press and seems like a good unit. I know I was talking to Toddy about the T-Reb. It's just passed through CE as well. So that's coming out this year, we hope. So there are some fantastic side-mounted CCR units coming.
I was in Italy with Toddy, and he was taking me through the rigs that he has, and it's well thought out. But again, that's gone through another iteration. There wasn't a manual version of that rig for a long time because I don't think it was allowed or something to do CE or something like that. They're kind of doing workarounds on all that stuff and then able to get testing for them and that type of thing. So the point is that Sidemount CCR is coming up very quickly. It's going to be a thing just like Sidemount was back in the day. Originally, it was just for explorers, and then eventually everybody and their brother wanted to be a Sidemount diver.
Yeah, that's where I came in. Somebody's brother, yeah. I've said it many times. I mean, I was motivated by Steve Bogart, Steve Martin, some of those guys who were not only great sidemount divers, great explorers, but they were also very good at promoting it. I live in a little corner of the world. At that time, I was in the States, but just being able to see them and see video of these guys and see a level of diving that I didn't know was possible. And that's what motivated me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, to look at sidemount diving. And that led me to cave diving. So it wasn't cave diving, then sidemount. It was sidemount, then, what should I do with this? And cave diving came straight away. So thank God for that, because otherwise I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd still be hunting crayfish and scallops probably. So interesting. Either. No, it's good to eat. It's funny, this country, New Zealand, 99% of divers here, that's what they do. And I spent 25 years as an open water certified diver hunting crayfish. It's crazy. If only I knew back in the early days what was possible. Anyhow, that's another story. So one thing that crosses my mind, and this is almost a personal question for Steve, I dive the Nerd as well, and I'm loving it. One thing I do have is I have it mounted on the loop, which I'm finding a little bit tricky. It's creating a little bit of mouth and jaw pressure on the mouthpiece, and I see you mount yours on a helmet, which for Ed Sorensen must be heresy, right? So I'm sure you guys have some discussions on that. But I love the way you do that. So talk me through your helmet mount system and how you set that up. Where do you run the cables and all that sort of thing?
Right. Well, because I do a lot of research diving, I use my hands a lot. And I'm usually elbows deep in muck, feeling around for fossils or whatever. And so I found when I'm trying to look at my hands, I kept having to look over the Nerd, and it was a little bothersome for me. So I thought, what if I can mount this thing up on the helmet? Because I'm not always looking up. Up and to my right is where I have Nerds set up on the helmet. And it's very high up onto the right. So I really have to kind of look up high and to the right to see it. And it stays up there quite nicely. I've used basically GoPro brackets, modified some of the little elbows that spin around and everything. Been able to tweak those with Dremel tools to accept one of the Nerd brackets. Even had to modify the Nerd bracket. The problem with when you modify the Nerd bracket is that it can no longer go on the DSV and you are committed. I don't know if Bruce will sell me additional ones so I can put them back on the DSV for clients or whatever, but we'll have that conversation with him. But it worked out very well for me. In the beginning, we were using the Fisher connectors, and those were a little bit of a hassle in that, one, in my opinion, have a little higher failure rate, but two, they're not water pluggable. So the helmet became part of the unit. So when I carried the unit down to the water, the helmet had to be attached to it. Kitting up, it was sort of in the way and hanging by the cable, and it can be a little frustrating. So recently, within the last 6 months, or about 8 months now, I guess, I switched to the CAN bus system. Night and day, in my opinion. This fantastic system. I can unplug it or plug it in the water, so I can put my entire kit on and then grab the pigtails, put them together while I'm wearing both the helmet and the unit, and then check everything, and I'm off to the races. So that has worked very well. The cable runs from the Nerd. I have two backup lights on the right side of my helmet. So the cable runs between those two things and then goes into one of the holes. I use one of the Light Monkey helmets. So it goes into one of the holes and then comes out another hole, does a spin in the back, and then goes through a piece of bungee. That makes it go straight down my back. That's where it's connected to the other part of the breather. It stayed very much out of the way, and it works very well. So just the other day, now that I'm doing the duals, I've put one on the other side as well. Two crazy antennas sticking out. I told my friend Rick that if I turn my head the right way, I can pick up Netflix and Hulu on it. It obviously looks pretty crazy, but for me personally has worked out well. My good friend Kenny Broad has started doing that as well. He says it's night and day. It just total solves a bunch of problems for him. He really enjoys it. It's not, I don't expect it to be a big wave of anything, but for certain people, it's a good option.
Yeah, I love the Nerd. I mean, I love having the data right there in your eye line. I think it's awesome being able to just look and see it. And as you say, if your hands are occupied or out of sight in some way, then it just makes so much sense. So the challenge I've had is it just feels a little bit obtrusive on the DSV, and I'm getting a little bit of mouth and jaw pressure. So I obviously haven't got it balanced properly. And seeing how you've got it on the helmet, I thought, yeah, that looks really good. I am using a Fisher connection, though, so I will need to change that if I want to change to a helmet mount.
Yeah, I had a lot of good experience with the CAN bus system now. I wish I'd have done it years ago.
Okay. So moving on, you were diving supervisor for Jonathan Bird's IMAX feature, Ancient Caves. You mentioned it a little earlier, and I saw the extended trailer just a couple of weeks back on Devil's Hole in Nevada. And I know this project was many years in the making, and the premiere, I think, just snuck out before COVID-19 shut us down. But can you tell us a bit about the project and your involvement in it?
Well, I don't know if you've ever seen Jonathan Bird's Blue World.
I have.
It's an amazing series, a huge following with the kids especially. He's such an animated guy, and he really does a great job of relaying all of his amazing sea stories to the public and especially the young people. And so he called me one day and said, hey, we're on Andros Island, and we just went and dove in a blue hole with one of the local dive operators here. And they told us if we wanted to go into caves, you were the guy to talk to. I said, cool. Who was your cave instructor? He said, oh, we're not cave qualified. Oh, but we've been in the cenotes in Mexico. I hear that all the time. Okay, we've been in the cenotes. Like, well, that's just not really how it works out here. And so a lot of negotiations went on after that. And I said, yeah, come on out and we'll get you certified. He became a student, and he wanted, of course, to make it a segment for his show. And so we brought out a certified cave diver cameraman who could actually videotape it while he was going through his course.
Yes.
And so we did that aspect of it. And then once he was certified, then we went and shot a segment just about the caves. Turned out well. And I think he just really got it in his blood that these caves were just amazing. Not only for just like a new aspect for his show, but I think he really digs it. I mean, it's taken him on a lot of new adventures since he's cave certified. There's
been many episodes on caves now, haven't there? And one thing I noticed personally was his standard of diving improved significantly over that period as well. So now I know why.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah, he's a force fin guy and stuff like that. Yes. It's like, can't have those in cave diving. Oh, around about that for a while. Anyway, it's been good. And then I've taken him to some incredible places. It's like, how can we possibly relay this to other people, non-cave diving people, in the best medium possible? How can we possibly, because the videos don't do it justice. The photography doesn't do it justice. The stories don't do it justice. And then he just got it into his head. Hey, I did this IMAX in the neutral buoyancy lab in Texas, the NASA lab. This would be the most amazing medium for an IMAX. So he just got it in his head and he went for it. He started looking at different people who might be able to help fund it. He went to McGillivray Freeman, who is a big IMAX distributor, and said, listen, we can do this. Here's some test footage. What do you think? And they're like, wow, that's pretty cool. Maybe we can do this. And so after a very long process, we started shooting. We shot here in the Crystal Caves, which was amazing for me because I got to do all the lighting, which I have always wanted to do. That's one of my favorite things to do because it changes the entire vibe. To see these things with light that was never meant to be there and do it creatively and to do it where it just really brings out the best of the cave. That was a very cool part of it. So I played a lot of parts in the making of this movie. One was the lighting. Two was I'm actually in front of the camera instead of behind the camera on this quite a bit. My joke is it's called Beauty and the Beast for cave diving. There's this very attractive, incredibly smart scientist woman, Gina Mosley, who does climate science. And she uses the speleothems, the cave formations, to look at high and low sea level stands throughout history. But she's not a cave diver, so she needs the short, fat, fuzzy, troll-like cave diver guy to go in there and get the collections for her to bring those out, and so she can continue to do her research. All fun aside, it's a good collaboration. It's something that we do all the time in our foundation. Anyway, if the scientist wants to go down and do their own collections, then we are there to actually train them to go into the caves. Anyway, so it all worked out, and Jonathan came up with these great ideas for different places all over the world where Gina could do not only really good science, but very attractive science in these stunning, beautiful places, and in places that not a lot of people can get into. So trying to get into Devil's Hole, which I'm trying to do again right now, it's like trying to pull teeth, man. It is really tough to get permission to get into some of these places. So it was a great ride to just be able to get access to some of these sites and using the IMAX movie as an excuse to get there.
Yeah, I just really enjoyed watching that because I was in South Australia last year and I had to do a single ropes technique course there because I got an ear infection. So I was out of the water and they said, look, do a single ropes course. So I did it, and then to watch Gina abseil into the cave and then watching them set up the shots and the obscene amount of money that it was costing per shot. So they had to absolutely make sure they got it correct. And I loved it. It was really enjoyable to watch the production. And I can't wait to see the actual feature itself. Yeah, I'm a long way from an IMAX screen, though.
I don't know when I'll ever be able to see it. I'm hoping that when all of this clears up, they're going to have another semi-premiere in Boston where Jonathan lives. That's going to be a big party that night. So I'm hoping to actually make it up to Boston for that one.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing on that. I really enjoyed hearing it. As I said, I can't wait to see it, and maybe they'll let it out in some sort of reduced format at some point as well so that the greater proportion can see it. But yeah, if you can see it in IMAX, I'm sure that's the way to watch it. That's the way it was intended to be viewed, right?
Yeah, I think 3D is next.
Very cool. Well, Brian, that's been amazing to catch up. I have really enjoyed hearing what was a very emotional story, and thanks for sharing on that. I know that was a little difficult there for a period, but just to hear how you came through the hurricane and to hear the positivity and to see what you've done since then and getting back up and running. COVID-19 will be past us soon, and I hope to see everything back up and running in Abaco as soon as possible after that, as I guess we do in the rest of the world. So thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, well, the tanks are all full and we're ready to rock and roll the second they lift the curse, I say. So,
well, fantastic. And thanks again. And I am absolutely going to make it a point to come out and visit. Every year I make a list of where I want to go. Abaco's in the top of that list. So I'm going to try in the next 2 years to see if I can get out and come through, maybe stop off at Ed's on the way and then come see you.
Yeah, that's a good choice. You'll have a blast. I'll look forward to it.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did making it. What an amazing story of Brian's recovery from Hurricane Dorian, how he's dealing positively with the current COVID-19 crisis, and also just the amazing work he is doing on the continuing exploration of the Crystal Caves in Abaco in the Bahamas. Also look out for Jonathan Bird's IMAX feature, Amazing Caves, which Brian had a large part in helping to produce. Don't forget, if you'd like to support Speaking Sidemount by becoming a patron of the show, just pop over to patreon.com/speakingsidemount, where you'll find all of the information on the different tiers and the bonus content that will be available to you. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Speaking Sidemount. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.